Right now, you're wearing something. Maybe it's a t-shirt you've owned for years, a hoodie you threw on without thinking, or clothes you carefully picked because of where you're going today. It feels so ordinary that it's almost invisible. Getting dressed is one of those routines we perform without questioning, just like brushing our teeth or locking the front door. But have you ever stopped to ask why humans wear clothes at all? Not why we wear expensive brands or why fashion changes every season, but why our species ever decided to cover our bodies in the first place. The answer isn't nearly as simple as most people assume. In fact, the story of clothing begins long before cities, agriculture, or even language as we know it today. It begins with a moment that quietly transformed what it meant to be human. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived without wardrobes, closets, or fabric. They walked across the African landscape exposed to the same sun, rain, insects, and rough terrain as every other animal around them. If clothing were an obvious necessity, why didn't humans invent it immediately? Why spend countless generations completely uncovered before suddenly deciding that animal hides, woven fibers, and carefully prepared garments were worth the effort? The common explanation is that people became cold. It sounds reasonable because today clothing protects us from winter, snow, and freezing temperatures. But when scientists looked at the archaeological timeline, something surprising appeared. Evidence suggests that early forms of clothing existed before humans settled permanently in the coldest regions of the planet. That means warmth alone cannot explain why clothing first emerged. Another explanation is protection. Sharp rocks, thorny plants, biting insects, and harsh sunlight certainly made life difficult. Clothing could reduce injuries and make travel easier. Yet this idea has its own problem. If protection were the primary goal, you would expect the first garments to focus on the hands, feet, or legs, the body parts that suffered the most physical damage. Instead, many of the earliest forms of body covering seem to have emphasized areas that carried social importance rather than practical necessity. That raises an intriguing possibility. Maybe clothing wasn't invented simply to defend the body. Maybe it changed something happening inside the human mind. One of the most fascinating clues comes from an unexpected source that few people ever think about: lice. Humans host different kinds of lice, and one variety survives only by living inside clothing. Because these parasites evolved alongside us, genetic researchers have been able to estimate when clothing became common enough for body lice to establish their own evolutionary path. Their findings suggest that consistent clothing use stretches back well over 100,000 years. It is remarkable that one of humanity's oldest inventions leaves its fingerprints not only in archaeological sites, but also in the DNA of tiny insects that depended on our behavior to survive. Yet even this discovery answers only when clothing became widespread. It doesn't answer why anyone bothered making it in the first place. To understand that, we have to look beyond survival and into the evolution of the human brain. Imagine picking up the skin of an animal and seeing something that doesn't exist yet. Instead of viewing it as leftover material, you imagine yourself wearing it tomorrow, next month, or even next winter. That single thought requires an extraordinary mental ability. It means you can picture a future version of yourself, solve problems that haven't happened yet, and transform raw materials into tools before you actually need them. This kind of future-oriented thinking is one of the defining characteristics of modern humans. It allows us to build homes before storms arrive, store food before winter comes, and make plans that may not pay off for years. Clothing may have been one of the earliest physical expressions of that remarkable ability. But another transformation was happening at the same time, one that may have mattered even more. Humans gradually became intensely aware of one another. Living in larger groups meant cooperation, competition, friendship, and conflict all became more complicated. Success increasingly depended not only on physical strength, but also on reputation. People began paying attention to how others behaved, what they contributed, and eventually how they presented themselves. The body was no longer just a biological structure. It became part of social communication. Long before written language, people needed ways to express identity without saying a word. A decorated hide, carefully arranged feathers, shells collected from distant shores, or pigments painted onto the skin could instantly communicate membership, experience, or status. Anthropologists have found evidence across cultures that body decoration appears even in places where heavy clothing was unnecessary for survival. This suggests that humans possessed a deep desire not merely to protect themselves, but to transform appearance into meaning. Clothing eventually became one of the most powerful symbols ever created. It could distinguish leaders from followers, warriors from healers, adults from children, and insiders from strangers. Every society developed its own visual language through what people wore. Even today, uniforms instantly identify police officers, doctors, firefighters, soldiers, judges, and athletes before they speak a single sentence. A wedding dress tells a different story than a business suit. Graduation robes carry a different message than a football jersey. Without realizing it, we continue using clothing as one of the oldest communication systems our species has ever invented. Psychology offers another fascinating perspective. Humans possess an unusually sophisticated ability known as self-awareness. Unlike most animals, we don't simply experience the world. We imagine how the world experiences us. We think about what other people might believe, notice, admire, or criticize. This capacity shapes nearly every aspect of our social lives. It influences confidence, embarrassment, pride, and countless decisions we make every day. Clothing naturally became part of this psychological landscape because it allowed people to influence first impressions before speaking a single word. It wasn't merely about hiding the body. It was about shaping perception. Over thousands of years, that instinct grew stronger as civilizations expanded. Trade routes introduced new fabrics. Technology produced dyes that displayed wealth. Tailors transformed clothing into craftsmanship. Entire industries emerged around appearance because humans consistently attached meaning to what they wore. Fashion itself is evidence that clothing escaped the limits of survival long ago. Nobody needs luxury materials, designer labels, or constantly changing styles to stay alive. Yet people across every generation continue searching for ways to express personality through appearance. That desire reflects something ancient embedded deep within our evolutionary history. Every morning, when you open your closet, your brain performs calculations that would be familiar to ancestors who lived thousands of generations before you. You think about the weather, where you're going, who you'll meet, and how you want to be perceived. Sometimes those choices happen consciously. Other times they happen automatically. Either way, clothing remains a bridge between your private identity and the public world around you. It quietly communicates confidence, professionalism, creativity, tradition, rebellion, or belonging before you ever introduce yourself. That is why getting dressed feels strangely important, even when nobody explains why. The fabric itself isn't magical. The meaning we attach to it is. Clothing represents one of humanity's earliest attempts to shape not only the environment, but also social reality. It reveals that our ancestors were thinking beyond immediate survival. They were imagining futures, building identities, strengthening communities, and communicating ideas without words. The next time you put on your favorite jacket or tie your shoes before leaving home, remember that you're participating in a tradition that stretches back well over 100,000 years. What seems like an ordinary morning routine is actually the continuation of one of the oldest human behaviors ever created. We didn't simply invent clothing because we needed something to wear. We invented it because we became the kind of species that could imagine ourselves, understand one another, and deliberately choose how we wanted to appear in the eyes of the world. Every outfit tells a story, and for as long as humans have been human, that story has never really stopped being written.